Welcome back, Scott. Another video.
Morning, morning.
This week, I want to pick up your brain on nutrition side, on nutritional strategies. What's out there? Is there anything specific for might differ between strengths, health, and many other things? And is there anything that you feel like is a baseline that every woman should have in their nutrition? you know, because obviously they have their periods and many other things that uh, hormones are needed to be adjusted slightly different. And I just want to find out, is there something that you feel like women would really benefit if they would have this kind of nutrition in their kind of plan majority of time? And then we can dig into macronutrients, micronutrients, proteins, and so on and so forth. So, what are the key nutritional considerations any woman should have for health to begin with? Because without health, we can't really get any other outcome.
Um, that's a good question, and I think it's something that I see the demographic that I work with, which is obviously females interested in fitness of some sort. Um, it's just an inadequate caloric intake across the board. I think the most important thing females should start off with is adequate calories. And again, I'm speaking to, you know, people that are fit or trying to become fit, athletic, fitness driven, aesthetic driven, something to do with body composition, and physical activity. The caloric intake is just inadequate always, almost always, like 99% of the time, and I think that really needs to be addressed. It's the biggest detriment because without adequate calories, the body right away has to adapt to less than ideal, scenarios. It's like having a race car and you just don't want to fill up the tank of gas, and then you're trying to race the shit of it all the time with half a tank. To me, there's just starting behind the start line, and from there, it's just a negative cascade. There is a certain amount of energy that needs to be taken in by a female. The best way to determine that is based on your lean body mass. So having an idea of how much muscle you carry versus adipose tissue or body fat is an important consideration. And then from there, you need to be above the critical threshold of energy availability. And Lyle McDonald's work has done a great job, as always, sort of getting into the nitty gritty of all the details. But essentially, it's 13.6 kcals per pound of lean body mass. So that means after you've accounted for your energy output, there needs to be that amount of calories left over to ensure that the body is not starting any sort of adaptations to less energy. So that's quite a bit of calories. I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look in some of these medical textbooks, they say like, the average diet is 2,000 calories, and that's for sedentary people that are not obese. So then if you look at somebody that's not obese and they're into fitness and they're eating 1,200 or 1,000 or 1,300 or 800, whatever it is, they're almost never even getting close to what the recommendations is for sedentary. So what you have is you have these physiologies that are adapting to low energy availability, and they do that without you really noticing because it's not going to change anything acutely that you would notice. It's downregulating other systems for later on in life. And that's the big thing. Like we have to invest, or females want to invest now in their physique in terms of their physiology and stuff like that for the future because of things like hormones disruptions and menopause and osteoporosis and all these things that potentially are coming ahead. We want to kind of do as much as we can to prevent that. So right from the get-go, adequate energy needs to be there. And then from there, then we have to start talking about, the macronutrient distribution, etc.
When you go into this, it's the first thing what people will hear is like, oh, I need to eat more. That means I'm going to gain more fat. What's
Yeah.
actually happening there? Because the majority will always hear eat less, more, you're going to get lean, you're going to get shredded, this and that. So what are the dangers of being in such a low calorie intake for a prolonged period of time, which we know is not just for women, it's for majority of time who start to invest in their fitness journey, so to speak. They go drastically either one way or another. Hey, if I want to
Mhm.
gain a lot of weight, I need to eat a lot of stuff, and if I want to lose some body fat, I need to eat next to nothing, fast for a week or whatever's happening there. So, what are the dangers of underfeeding yourself with inadequate calorie intake for lean body mass to begin with?
So the dangers are, like I said, are they're not going to be anything acute. Like you're not going to just fall over dead, theoretically. It's an accumulation. Typically, well, not typically, always the body is going to adapt to its environment. That's how we can survive living anywhere across the globe. We're an adaptive species. So if a female undereats her body's energy needs, the body will adapt certain things, certain systems to ensure that the essentials are met. Your heartbeat's still going to pump. Your blood pressure is going to remain. The pH in your blood, all these things that basically could kill you instantly, kind of idea, they will stay stable because the body is surviving in the environment. But what it doesn't need for survival is the ability to reproduce. So, one of the dangers of inadequate caloric intake is hormonal disruptions to the menstrual cycle. So you can basically, kickstart amenorrhea if you are under eating all the time, and because the body is not going to say, "Wow, we have no food, so let's have a baby," because we can't even feed ourselves, but we can make sure that you're feeding the offspring. Like the body won't do that. It's an adaptation from a biological point of view that will ensure survival of you. And then from there, if you have these hormonal disruptions, it's to disrupt the ability to reproduce. But what it's doing is it's starting to diminish hormones, essentially like menopause. So as a female runs through her healthy reproductive years, she gets into that perimenopausal phase of life, and then finally menopause. And essentially, menopause is the reproductive hormones are basically gone, because the body again it's thinking we're not making babies anymore, we're past that time of life, we don't need these hormones anymore, we can use this energy in other areas. But what happens is that the loss of some of these hormones has a very potential negative cascading effect, but it's such a time consuming thing. We know all the videos you and I have talked about and put out, we know that hormones are just signals and they take a very long time to manifest into something permanent or semi-permanent. So if you look at like a boy and a girl at 10 years old, hormonally, they're very, very similar. It's over the duration of puberty, which is, 8 to 10 years, where now you have a man and a woman. But that's just because the hormones were changing and fluctuating and took that amount of time to sort of manifest. So the same sort of thing would apply here. If we just take these hormones and tank them too soon, you lose some of their benefits. And the big one with females and the risk is osteoporosis. So it's basically bone mineral density is degrading over time. And estrogen, specifically estradiol, is one of the more relevant hormones for that. So if you are negatively, or not negatively, if you're eating like a negative energy balance, essentially you're eating into a deficit, your body's adapting to the low energy threshold, and it's going to do so by turning down certain systems, and one of those will be hormones. So the biggest concern I would think for females under eating is reproductive health and bone mineral density health long term.
Is there anything that they need to specifically focus for this to not happen in a way of what kind of foods they pick, or will this be predominantly just calories as such?
Predominantly just calories will take care of adequate energy, but just calories will not necessarily give the ideal scenario for body composition. Essentially, you don't want to just be gaining body fat. There's nothing healthy about constantly gaining body fat. You need a certain amount of body fat for, reproductive hormones to essentially have the raw materials to be synthesized. Um, but we don't want to be gaining excess body fat because it's just going to cause an inflammatory state. But adequate calories will provide the body with its needs. But you do want to get specific to the macronutrient breakdown, and I think that's the second thing. If you have the energy balance correct, which is step one, it has to be the foundation. If you have that correct, then now you need to prioritize protein next. Protein means priority. That has to be in play because that's going to ensure the building blocks for the body, right? We want to ensure that we have all the raw materials to do things like maintain lean muscle or build more, maintain the integrity of joints, and all the extra stuff that amino acids do in the body. So after you've got adequate energy, you need adequate protein. And then from there, it starts to become pretty niche. But I would say across the board, male and female, but since we're speaking about females, across the board, calories in has to be correct and adequate protein has to be correct. That's, in my opinion, that's all of us. Once that's established, now you start looking at the individual. How do we distribute the calories specifically? Because sometimes there's scenarios where you may need more fats or carbs, depending on goals, digestive issues, food intolerances, etc. But everyone seemingly is missing step one. If you miss the first step, you're off to a bit of a shaky start.
So when you talk about like proteins, that's kind of interesting for me. I know you've read Lyle's book about protein. Is there anything latest that might have changed what he has put out in sense of quality of protein? I know I've read a study where they compared plant-based and animal-based, and they actually matched amino acids, and animal-based was still way better than anything out there. No whey supplement, no plant-based kind of equivalent comes even near to maintaining lean muscle mass and hormonal balance and so on and so forth. And we still don't know why, but it just seems like we do benefit more from animal-based protein rather than anything else. Is this something that you see, or is it not as not as kind of obvious that hey, you only need to stick to these rules?
No, Lyle's protein book, I think it's 2006 he wrote this.
Yeah, you're advanced. You have a hard
2000,
copy. It's hard to get hard copy now.
yeah, 2007 he wrote this. It's still right. The best thing about uh, his book and all of his work is he was right then with his predictions, and they're just coming out with studies now to say this, but it's because he thinks. Like everyone's saying, oh, you need this amount of grams per pound or whatever of protein for muscle, for muscle, for muscle, for muscle. But what about everything else, like connective tissue and all these things? It's been well known and argued all the time by people that are against animal proteins, but animal proteins seem to be the superior protein. It's seemingly without a doubt. I have trained quite a few female vegans, and they do just fine. It just is a lot more work for them to get the proper amino acid profiles in place. And I don't have a clone of them to compare what they would do if they were twins and one did, animal based and one did plant based, and they match amino acids. I can't say who would, turn out better. Um, But we know the animal proteins have done all the work for you. Mother Nature did all this for us. I don't think too many of us are smarter than that. Um, I think it's there for a reason. I've also worked with some plant-based people who have the worst blood profiles you'll see, even though they're eating healthy.
Mm.
Um, I would not be doing a plant-based diet, period, in my opinion. Um, I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's wrong. There will be niche scenarios where it's beneficial. But unless you are a very, very niche scenario, and it's usually something to do with some sort of health ailment of some sort, it's not superior in any way. Animal proteins are where it's at. The amino acid profile is set up. There's a bit of a misconception where people are saying, like, well, that's a complete protein, that's an incomplete protein. The foods that we're eating, they're not really incomplete proteins. The proteins are proteins. It's just that the amount of the amino acids differs. And in a lot of the plant-based proteins, the amino acids, the profile is there. It's quote unquote a complete protein, but the amount of certain amino acids is inadequate. So that's why they have to combine things. But it's so much easier to just eat animal protein. But again, if you don't want to, or it's against your beliefs, or your body doesn't, digest it, whatever they think is happening, you can get away with plant-based stuff. But it's a lot more work, it's a lot more expensive, and I don't think it's superior in any which way.
Is there any correlation with what type of nutrition strategy someone follows, their health, and where they live? So I do have some plant-based people, and they only get away with it if they live in near equator. If they live in northern hemisphere, it's the blood test to get them healthy is an uphill battle all the time. Do you see any correlation like this at all?
Yeah, I have seen that. And I think a lot of that comes down to this, like you say, the geographical location. And then I think that's also generations over time. There's adaptations that have happened to to thrive in the current environment. Like there's people that, the ketogenic people that like say that's the ultimate thing. They've done studies in like Inuit populations, and though they live in an area where they essentially don't really get exposure to much carbohydrates at all, they basically thrive on fat, their body will not go into ketosis.
Hmm.
So a lot of these people are claiming a lot of these things, and it's just inaccurate. It doesn't make it wrong what they're doing, but their claims of it being the best or the only way is what's is ignorant and inaccurate. I think when you have a population that lives in a certain area, they've adapted to that area. There's only a certain amount of food or a certain type of food, and your body's been able to digest that or not digest that. And if you would move from one location, northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, there might be some adjustments that your body goes through to just deal with the different foods. Um, I know they warn a lot of North Americans, if you go traveling to an exotic country, they'll say, be careful of the water, be careful of their fruit. Their fruit's different. It's some people say it's fresher. I don't know what fresher fruit means, but you'll see a lot of North Americans, it happens all the time. They'll eat this fruits from these countries they're not from, and it's just going right through them.
Hmm.
Who knows? There's a lot of things that could be happening there, from different pesticides to no pesticides to the fact that maybe they just started eating fruit and their fiber increased, and at home they don't. Like there's a million variables, but there's definitely something to people thriving with the foods of their environment. There's also been some talk of blood work, like blood labs, changing the normal range of certain ethnicities based on where they came from versus now. Just because over generations, their body's adapting to the environment and things change in the body because the body is constantly adapting because it's constantly trying to find a more efficient way to do everything. So if you keep moving, your body has to keep adjusting to the new environment.
Yeah, that's interesting that you just kind of mentioned that the blood test, and when they ask you about your ethnicity, it might sometimes give you a false positive or negative if you don't live where the ethnicity comes from, right?
Yeah.
Is so that's quite interesting for me. That I see it a lot, and especially when people need to respond to certain food or supplement, and you know what's going to happen to this person based on a study, and then you go like, yeah, but you're not living there, so
Right.
you skew up your response. So let's get back to your
Changes
nutrition,
everything. It
because
changes everything. They do studies of people that live in higher altitudes. They have naturally higher hematological values because of their altitude. Um, I have worked with a lot of um, Jamaican people and a lot of Caribbean people actually, and they have a different EGFR value on blood work right from the get go. They have normally, not always, normally they have a lot higher insulin resistance naturally. We normally do not get a lot of carbs going into some of these ethnicities. It's not a racial thing I mean, I guess it is a racial thing, but it's not a racist thing to say. This is just an observation. I trained a Jamaican guy, turned him IFBB pro. On stage as a pro, he was placing top three in multiple shows. He won one show actually. His carb intake was like 150 grams a day. He just couldn't process carbs very well. That's just the way it is, and it's interesting. I've talked to some very smart people, um, and Broderick actually is Broderick Chavez is a wealth of information with this kind of stuff. So when you start talking to him about like biology, which is his wheelhouse, he points out things to me often. And one of the things he pointed out to me is like, if you think back to like, it was apparently a terrible time. I didn't live it, so I don't know. But the slavery time, what you had is you had these ethnic people working very, very hard, very, very, very long hours for very little food. And over the generations, this adaptation has occurred. Maybe it's not a coincidence that some of these people just can't process a ton of carbohydrates or a ton of calories in general, just because that's just their gene pool, the way it kind of cascaded through the generations. I find it fascinating, and it's definitely interesting when you look at different morphological shapes of people. Like you can take the same body weight person, someone that lives in a very, very cold climate will naturally be a little shorter, a little stockier, shorter limbs because they're trying to keep the core warm. And then if you go to like something near the equator, they're usually taller, lankier, longer limbs, and that's because that's the body's ability to cool. Like none of these things are coincidence. It's very, very fascinating. And then what we think now is we can just sort of mix it all together and everything will be same, 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 but it's not. It never seems to be anyway. And all the blood work I see shows that all the time.
so bringing back to nutrition, like a baseline and whatnot. Everyone wants to be fit, everyone wants to be healthy. You kind of highlighted the majority of people probably undereat their necessary calories. So where does the ability to sustain your health and not being too restrictive come into play? What does restrictive actually mean for you when you talk about that? When somebody comes to you and like, hey, I'm eating this, I'm eating that, and you go to them, you know what, you're probably eating inadequate. Let's bring it up to what you need to eat. How do you overcome that mental barrier of them saying, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm just going to get fat. And you're like, you know what? You probably won't. So, how do you discuss that thing that, hey, if you eat more likely you're going to start weighing less because you're going to give yourself more energy to actually do what you're trying to force your body to do, which is burn body fat, build muscle. So how do you go about that discussion and how does that unwrap as you go on?
That's a good question, and that is sort of the crux for a lot of females I work with. Is the increase of food increases the scale weight, and it does, and it will, and it should. You've put more food in your body. So when you step on the scale, you weigh more because there's more inside you. Um, the way I work around that is right from the get go. One of my clients and I do our check-ins. I don't restrict how often they can communicate with me. There's not like you can only talk to me on Thursday at 3:30. Like they can reach me whenever they want. Um, and I try to be very thorough with my explanations so they understand why we're doing what we're doing. So right from the get-go, I explain what the process will likely look like. If somebody's coming to me that's in that, that I think is inadequately fueling their body for their goal or their activity level, I will say, okay, these are the calories that we need to be eating based on your body composition, which I will measure. And I don't want to adjust them at all unless you force me to, but I will fight you a little bit for 2 menstrual cycles, assuming you're, menstruating regularly, because I want you to see what does follicular look like against follicular and luteal against luteal. I also want you to experience the ups and downs of scale weight, which is why I want you to measure it daily so you get an idea of the fluctuations that you cannot prevent.
Mm.
Um, so when I do that and I start to measure body composition instead of just scale weight, it starts to show them, hey, my scale weight's not moving, but I'm getting leaner via whatever method we're using to measure. I like calipers, but I have some clients that use DEXA scans. Some people use InBody. They will all work as long as you set up the parameters correctly. And once they start seeing that they're getting leaner, first they'll see it on with data. The measurements will say you're leaner, but they won't see it in their clothing. They won't see it on the scale. And so they won't believe it yet. But they'll just see that number that says you're leaner, and that gives them a glimmer of hope. Like, okay, I'll let it go another week. And after a few weeks, they're seeing it, but now they're starting to feel it very slightly. All of a sudden, usually the waistband on a female is the first thing they'll notice. It's a little looser. Once they see that, it's starting to become more and more evident that, yes, something is happening here, yet the scale is the same, or maybe even the scale's more. And after I've gotten them through 2 cycles, 2 menstrual cycles, and if, like I said, if they don't menstruate regularly, we'll just work our way each week from week to week. But once I've gotten them that far along, it's undeniable now because now they're actually even seeing it, and now they're fine. There'll be the odd time, like if they disappear for, vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, they'll come back a little bit paranoid because they're way more. But once the measurements are going back in, they'll be okay again. And once they see that, it's like the weight of the world came off their shoulders, and that keeps their compliance high. And once I have their compliance high, I don't ever have any issues. They make the progress, they reach their goal, and it's seemingly always the case.
So you mentioned calories are important. Protein will be next important thing. And you already mentioned like 13.6 kilocalories per pound of lean muscle mass would be something that you should kind of aim for individuals that's healthy. And then what are the numbers that people should aim for when it comes to protein?
I think the protein thing, you can get into millions of debates. You can go to like 0.82 grams per pound, all the way down to zero point 0.7. I think the FDA says it's like 0.64 or something like that. But I think you can literally just do the age old bodybuilding 1 gram per pound. You have adequate. You have more than adequate. Almost certainly you don't have too much. And if you're getting your calorie intake needs to be adjusted lower, and a lot of those calories are going to protein, and your satiation is, or your cravings are not being satisfied or something like that, you can start to move things around a little bit. But if you're starting with 1 gram per pound, that's more than enough. And usually females have a hard time eating that much protein. So whatever they're eating based on their journaling or their explanation of what to eat, I bring it up from there. I will try to get them to intake a lot. And if they can't, we'll just start to slowly raise it. But I would say probably 0.7, 0.8 grams per pound is getting close to a lower threshold. if you're strength training. If you're not strength training, you're just being active, I would still shoot for a very similar number because protein does more than just create muscle or help build muscle. It's very important for all the building blocks of the body. And one thing that I'm noticing now at 46 years old is joint integrity is relevant, and so protein is very important for that. So I would not want to cut it short. You can overdo your protein a ton, and it's really not going to be an issue. There's a lot of people saying it's bad for your kidneys, it's bad for this, bad for that. There's a lot to unravel there when it comes to that. I work with a type 1 diabetic who has his kidney function monitored all the time. And over the decade that I've been working with him, the protein intake, which always gets approved by his specialists, has gone as far as 2.5 grams per pound, as low as half a gram per pound. It doesn't impact his markers at all. And that's not from week to week. This is a decade long. Um, so there could be a scenario where too much protein is too much protein, but it's not going to be in a healthy individual. And even in a sick population, it's going to be an amount that most people aren't doing anyway. So I would say shoot for a gram per pound. If you're reaching that, it's enough for sure. If you're getting close to that, it's probably still enough. But from there, you might want to start measuring other factors like compliance and real world results.
So just before you carry on, let's say we're talking about somebody who just wants to look better, wants to feel better, wants to be healthy for as long as possible. Is protein timing important?
No.
That was like, shut up, just
Yeah.
get your
No.
protein in. So if somebody eats a massive piece of steak once a day, they get their 100 grams of protein in one sitting, you don't really bother about anything else.
I mean, I think you can do better. I think two feedings would be better than one. But if you had one meal only and it had the protein target you need, it would be enough. At the end of the day, the body's just going to have a nitrogen surplus or not. I think, and there has been research that
So it's
shows
not like you need to have your 20, 30 grams every single meal, and anything above that is just a waste of protein. And,
no.
like there was a lot of discussions like this. And to me, it always blew my mind because like I was raised in a country where the food was not scarce, and at the same time, it was. So I would eat jam sandwich in a breakfast and then huge amount of food at night.
Yeah.
And everyone was jacked.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The body is incredibly resilient. It can handle these things. Like, I mean, there were times where people weren't eating for days. They would hunt, they'd kill whatever they'd kill, and that would feast them for a few days, and then they wouldn't be eating for a week after. Clearly the body can handle that. Now, if you're going to set up the perfect scenario, I would say 2 or 3 meals a day is probably across the board plenty.
Mm.
I personally eat 4. I have some clients that eat 7. I have some clients that eat 1. It really kind of depends. At the end of the day, it's the foundation needs to be established. Adequate protein first. If you have adequate protein, if you can have it divided over 2 meals or 3 meals, you're going to get slightly better outcomes from that, but nothing that we can measure. It's all speculative. It's all opinions. And as soon as these fuckers take drugs, which they all do anyways, none of that matters. I would argue you could not even eat protein and take drugs and still have all your muscle. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, so that's right. I'm gonna give you a curveball, so to speak. I'm gonna throw you at this. Is a woman who's taken contraceptive pill responding to food differently than the one who isn't?
That's a fascinating question. From a, how do I word this? From a interaction with the drug and food, I think there would be certain foods that could affect hormones, like, broccoli, for example, is high with DIM, and that can have an impact on estrogen levels. Birth control, depending on what they're using, can change hormone levels, but that's pretty niche. I wouldn't worry about it. I would put the way you want to be eating in play, and I would measure the outcome and see if it needs to be adjusted. But now, if the birth control changed their um, hunger index or their satiety index or just their food cravings and tolerances, etc., then just be by eating less or more, that could change things. But from an actual interaction with the drug itself, aside from maybe the fluctuating hormones, I'm not aware of anything that could be an issue. Um, Now, most of my females that I work with, I shouldn't say most, but easily half of them use contraceptive. IUDs are more common, and they're less. They have a less overall effect systemically on the body. They're more of a local. But even the females I work with that use oral contraceptives, it's never been an issue that we needed to address, and it has been something that we monitor via blood work because we're always looking at blood work. But typically, the base foundation still trumps everything. If the calories are right, the protein is right, everything else just needs to be tweaked based on the individual and the context of the goal.
Yeah. What you just mentioned, like IUDs, I do hear it a lot being very popular in Canada specifically. Then UK and things like that will be contraceptive pill or how do you even call that? Like a pellets, whatever the hell
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
like that. And then where I come from, it's more about like, hey, let's just count this stuff. We don't really jump from one partner to another every 2 months. I'm kind of trust this natural cycle, then we kind of figure everything out. And in America, it's like plan B, always away.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you do you. Are there any myth and misconceptions that are very popular that you need to almost fight and try to explain to girls when they come your way that are the most common thing?
Probably it comes down to demonizing certain foods. Like I remember I did a seminar at this fight club years ago. And this one female, it was male and female fighters. This one female mentioned about her weight shot up because she had a cookie. So cookies are the devil and sugar is the devil. And it has nothing to do with that. It was just a change in something. The homeostatic point of the body or homeostasis was altered. The cookie had more sodium or the cookie was more total volume, food volume or something. It had nothing to do with the cookie being bad and it was bad. So the biggest misconception is usually demonizing food. Um, there's not really a bad food. It's the diet in its whole. You want to have an 80% wholesome, nutritious, calorically poor, nutrient dense foods, 20% crap. And if you're doing that, you're winning. You're winning. I think you're winning the entire time.
And I think what you just said highlights what a lot of girls do. They eat very little,
Yeah.
and cookie might be up 700 calories. That's not 20%. That's way,
Right.
way more than majority of girls will have usually in a day. And
100%.
yeah, so it's not it wasn't a cookie, it was calorie abundance and your probably inability to digest that type of food if you don't consume it regularly. Uh,
Yep, exactly. So the body's adapted to your salad. And, if you're eating salads all the time, it's very voluminous and you're going to feel full and you're not really getting much out of it. So
yeah,
you lack protein and you lack calories in general.
yeah, it's like some people like really spicy food. If they and then somebody who's a bodybuilder, so to speak, and eats just broccoli, piece of chicken, and rice that has no flavor whatsoever, you give them a Chinese, of course you're going to spend all night in toilet. It's just
Yeah,
normal,
yeah.
right? Okay, I think that was like a really good breakdown on like a baseline of understanding nutrition. Hey, get your calories right, check in with yourself. A lot of people never do. They're like, I eat plenty or I eat little. What does that actually mean? More often than
Right.
you don't even know what you're doing. And then get your
Right.
protein right, and then go from there. So I think we can go in a much more bigger details next time around. And I'm
Yep.
mindful of your time, Scott. So I'm gonna let you off now, and I'll see you next video.
Yeah, sounds great.